I read about 120 nonfiction books this year, and doing just a top 10 list feels a little bit negligent. So here is a full top 20 list of my favorite nonfiction books of 2025. Coming in at number 20, we have The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on One American Street by Mike Tidwell. This was a completely unexpected read for me. I haven't heard a single person talk about this book, and it was just absolutely delightful to get climate change perspective through the lens that was so shrunk down and just talking about One American Street. It really talks about what climate change is doing to trees and like just your most local environment. So how we can conceptualize this like massive thing that a lot of us have a difficulty understanding, and how we can just like see it from out of our living room window. I thought this was such an enrapturing way to tell a story of climate change, but also I think puts on just like the personal perspective into like how it is operating in all of our lives, and how there is an immediacy to how we should think about climate change, how we should see climate change, and most of all, like how climate change can and should be addressed inside of our local communities. I love this one. I thought it was absolutely delightful. At number 19, this is the most fun you can have with a incredibly depressing book. This is Everything Must Go: The Stories We Tell About the End of the World by Dorian Lynskey. This is a book I read for book club this year, and it basically just takes you through different apocalypses, how media and history has talked about them, how we have conceptualized the end of humanity over and over again through different capacities, like through plagues, through craters, through aliens, through just cataclysmic events. And it's so fun. And also, I think has this like kind of media analysis approach to the writing style that is just like something that I have very rarely ever read a nonfiction book and just been like, I don't know how he wrote this. So the citations for this are almost like 100 pages in and of itself. And so just like the thought and the carefulness that went into collecting the ideas that go into this book was so fascinating that I was just totally fixated on it. And it's one of those things that even if you read it fast or slow, it's just one of those things you will like absolutely devour, and that like kind of infects you in such a fun way. And so, even though you're talking about the end of the world, you're having such a great time doing it that I think this book is kind of for any type of reader. Like, whether you like kind of catastrophic stories or whether you just like stories being told in an interesting and fascinating way, this is definitely a book for you. Coming in at number 18 is the book that I think is going to like ruin your conversations with friends, but I also think that's kind of a fun thing. That is Mood Machine: The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of a Perfect Playlist by Liz Pelly. This is a fascinating book that is like kind of a business history and a reportage of exactly how Spotify has operated, how it rose to prominence, how it has basically captured the music industry. But then intertwined within that is this cultural criticism of how this has changed the landscape of how we digest and ingest music, how we think about music being a consumer, and also I think just the larger culture of convenience culture is like something that Spotify has really excelled at building into the American consciousness. And so I think this book, between these two types of storytelling, interweaves this perfect narrative that I think will be one of those things that you will not stop thinking about this. I read this book back in January. I think about this all the time. And the ways that I want to consume music, the ways that I want to be a listener of this art form, I feel I am so much more critical of now than I used to be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the business practices of Spotify. So this is a book that kind of feels almost true crime in its nature, but I think also has this great resonance with how we think and view about some of the most prominent forms of media that any of us participate in. So I think this is one that you should definitely read with friends. I think it creates a lot of really interesting conversations. And if you haven't switched away from Spotify, if you read this, I think you're going to have to at least like consider doing that at some point. At number 17 is the book that I read for the first time this year, but is a concept that I have been thinking about it since Cory Doctorow talked about it, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. It's basically been this like ever present thought in my mind of the enshittification of culture. And so the fact that this book finally came out this year is just like one of those things that like I have not stopped thinking about for years now. And getting to read it was such a fun and interesting experience. The book is Enshittification: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It by Cory Doctorow. This is basically, I would say, a must read book if you are trying to become more critical in how we talk about and think about our current, business empires, also with like our tech and media landscape. If you are like unsure of how to feel about social media, I think this is the perfect book to add to your reading list because he is so incredibly well spoken in how he explains this like kind of philosophical concept of why everything is getting worse. So he gives you these case studies in which he like dives deeply into these topics, but also throughout that he's giving kind of just this, I think, like political philosophy lesson of how we need to be critical of these basically American tech empires, what this is doing to culture, how it is making us worse. And honestly, the hopeful note that he has is something that I want to be obsessed with more. I think Cory Doctorow deeply, deeply hates the media landscape that we have. Like everything in social media just drives him nuts. But at the end of the day, he loves technology. He loves the possibility of what it could become. And him writing in a way that tells you, like, do not be depressed about how this is like ruining our brains, about the brain rot of society, because there is a method and a way through this. And I think that's just it's such an incredible way to think about and conceptualize the thing that most of us spend a huge portion of our time consuming. And so I really love this. I thought the writing was excellent. I thought the storytelling was excellent. And I honestly think that just like the essence of this book is almost more important than all of it. And this is a slight spoiler for this book, but basically what he gets into is like the book is 250 pages of explaining enshittification, and then it is 5 pages of saying, you know what? It doesn't matter whether you get all the technical details of this concept right. What matters is that you believe that we can create and build a better future. So take the idea of enshittification, bastardize it, run with it, just create your own kind of wishful manifestations of what we could build together. And that's the path forward for all of us. And I think that's just such a beautiful and brilliant recognition for what exactly is happening in culture. And I love this book. I think this is a book that every book club that does any nonfiction reading, they absolutely should add this to their list because it's an essential must read book. At number 16, we have Maggie Helwig's Encampment: Resistance, Grace in an Unhoused Community. This is basically her portrait as a female minister in Canada, how she has used her church in order to help the homeless populations in Canada. And I thought this one was like a beautifully resonant short story of just like the very intimate things that she has had to do, how she has had to evaluate her labor, how she has had to evaluate her value, and how she has had to try and care for a community. This one is a really interesting book because I think even more than like the finer stories of homelessness, I think this book had such a grace and a just beautifully empathetic approach to storytelling that as much as I learned about homelessness in Canada, and as much as I learned about like the intricacies of how these lives operate and the types of communities that are being neglected in society, I also think the religious aspect of this story was something that I truly can't escape. And I left religion more than a decade ago. It's something that I just do not have in my life. I had a lot of trauma from how I grew up in the church. And this did more to cure my religious trauma than literally any book I've ever read. And I thought that was such a completely surprising quality to this book. I think this is a book that if you've had religious trauma and you just like learning about the world and like want to understand all the complex nuances that we live, I think this is a book that you should pick up. It's a really short book. The audiobook is also incredibly well done, and I think this is a book that no one has talked about. I think it maybe has like 30 reviews on Goodreads. Like no one knows of this one, but I found it this year and I'm so happy that I did because it's a book that has stuck with me for 6 months. I think about it constantly and I love spending time with this one. At number 15, we have Original Sins: The Miseducation of Black and Native Children and the Construction of American Racism by Eve L. Ewing. This book is a tour de force. I don't think there is probably any book on this list that I would say needs to be read in schools as much as this book. Like, I think this book should be required for every freshman in high school. I think it is such a fundamental approach to how we conceptualize the history of education in this country that more people need to understand, and that also I think we need to be always present minded of how the history of education has been a history of racism. Eve's ability to tell this story is just so resonant and so beautiful. The writing is impeccable, but also the synthesis of history and culture within this book is something that is inescapable. I think it's one of those books that is probably going to make a lot of top 10 lists this year. And I think it's one of those books that you should absolutely not pass up, because regardless of like what level you have understood or that you know about the history of education, I think Eve does such an incredible job at painting the whole picture, of really getting a snapshot of exactly how we should think and view about the history of education, that this is truly like one of those unmissable books, and I think it is so fascinating, so well told, and so essential. At number 14, we have a book that probably has more caveats than any other book, and that is The Fort Bragg Cartel: Drug Trafficking and the Murder in the Special Forces by Seth Harp. This is a true crime look at murders that have happened at Fort Bragg within special operations. Also, in telling these stories, he is trying to paint a picture of exactly how these basically black ops groups, how they operate, how they have been operating, and what that says about the American empire as it exists. My caveat for this book is that, one, trigger warnings galore. This book is graphic. This book is intense in so many different ways. And while I think this book is excellent, the reporting is phenomenal, I think this book works best within a collection of other readings on American empire. Because I think what it kind of slightly fails to do in painting the broad, huge picture, I think this will make this book only stand out more when you have read those other texts, when you have read things like End of the Myth by Greg Grandin, or some of the work by Steve Cole, or the work by Vincent Bevins. These other people that are talking about how the US military has operated for more than a century and how it has built up this completely new form of warfare that the American public simply just does not understand and doesn't know about. This book really captures a lot of the like small minute details within that. Doesn't always give the reader the greatest idea of how these things are truly operating within the grand scope of geopolitics. And so I think this book is absolutely a must read if you are someone that is focused on reading about the American empire, but I also think it should be read a little bit with caution, but also with an understanding that there is so much more to tell about this story, and that I think this book fits perfectly with inside those stories. So I think you should read it, but I just want to say take your time with it, because it is consuming and deeply depressing. At number 13 on the list, I think we have our only academic press book of the list, but that is Natalie Petrozella's Fit Nation: The Gains and Pains of American Exercise Obsession. This is really like an encyclopedic book at talking about like kind of the philosophical background of how fitness has come into being as part of like the American, public experience, like both with like how we are reared within like a culture of fitness, but then how it has been really captured by a lot of alt-right forces in this country. It goes into kind of all of that and also zooms in and out of these like very particular interesting stories. I think it tells both the grand landscape of how fitness has operated in the American history, but also I think it gives you really good insights into like the nuances that, unless you have spent a lot of time in fitness circles, that you might not know about some of these stories. And so telling both the big picture and the small picture, I think, is such a great way to give the reader a really firm and solid understanding of kind of fitness culture, fitness history, and fitness vibes, really, more than anything. I think this book just does everything it sets out to do. And I also think it's like one of those subjects that I deeply care about. This might not be a book that hits for you, but I do think if you are interested in this subject at all, it is an absolute must read, because if you are wanting to have a critical understanding of what fitness is and can be, and how it has been part of American culture, both through sports and also through just like going to the gym, I think this is the book that you will absolutely devour because it's so well written, so well told. It's a fascinating look, and I love spending every moment with this one. At number 12 is Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes by Tamim Ansari. This was maybe just one of the most enjoyable history reading experiences that I've had in a long time. I was a history major in college. I've read hundreds of history books over the years, and this one really stands out as both like telling a beautiful story that is so complicated and telling it so vividly that I think you're just like kind of living within this story while you're going through centuries of history. And I think that's a lot of problem that a lot of history writers have of like really feeling grounded within the story and especially like holding your attention while you're transitioning through historical periods, through different cultures. And I think Ansari is so adept at being able to just fully supplant you within the context in which he is writing about in every single moment of this book that I think it's just a standout as a piece of history writing, but also as it tells the history of Islam. I think it's so incredibly well done. It's so like deeply felt, and you can feel it from the author that he is just so passionate and interested in this subject that I think it's one of those things that I've always like wanted to get a good education on like the history of Islam. And I don't think it's not like that I've read this book and now I think I know everything. It's simply that I have read this book and it gives me such a great background or grander context for so many of the conversations that I hear about the religion. And so I think this book, for anyone that wants to read about the history of Islam or just wants to learn about Islam in general, this book is an essential read. I think it's so well done. The history writing is great for anyone that just loves history. The topic is fascinating, and I think it just tells a beautiful story and has made me want to read so much more on the subject. So, if you're just looking to read an interesting history book next year, this is probably the one that I would recommend as much as any history. So if you want to read about world history or history of religion, this is absolutely the book for you. At number 11 on the list is a book that now I'm holding it up. I think you're probably very familiar with it. That is The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. This is a book that is like on every leftist reading list, and I finally got to it this year and was just blown away. It also feels weird to rate it on this list at all, but I did want to include it because I do think I want to just simply be another voice that is just saying, like, yes, you should absolutely read this. This is worth your time. This is a book that you should spend time with. All I will say about this, because I think it requires so much more conversations and so much more nuance than a wrap up video like this can provide. I will say that the first chapter of this is one of the most draw you into the idea of a book kind of sensations that you will find in any book ever. I started reading this, and by like page 5 I was like, I can't think about anything else in life. This is all I'm considering, this is all I'm thinking about, this is all I'm viewing from my mental space at any point in the day. And so it's one of those things that this book does require a lot of patience. It requires some slow and intentional reading, but it's also one of those things that you are just like steadily and constantly rewarded for your effort with this book. So I think this book is one that you should add to your reading list if you haven't. And I also think probably as much as any book on this list is a book that I will absolutely be returning to, whether in part or in whole, so many more times in my life. So if this is just one more voice amongst the many telling you, you absolutely have to read The Wretched of the Earth. Coming in at number 10 is the book that I honestly think I just had the most fun with this year. This is More Everything Forever, AI Overlords, Space Empires, and Silicon Valley's Crusade to Control the Fate of Humanity by Adam Becker. I both did the audiobook and the physical reading of this book, and switching back and forth was like a phenomenally fun experience for me. This book is really just a takedown of the tech like hyper industry that we are living through. It talks about kind of like the philosophical backings that a lot of these CEOs have. And so it really gets into like just how insane everything in culture is. And it does a great job at being both pithy and also like incredibly nuanced with how it talks about these people, these ideologies, and also this like strange and complex world that we have built and are building. It's such a fun takedown that I think is just like a delightfully, gleefully angry expression of how so many of us are living in a culture that we just fucking hate. I loved devouring this book. If you like podcasts on like the topic of technology, or you just like watching people rant about like why such and such app sucks, like this is the perfect book for you because it's so fun. It's so funny at the same time, but it also has so much like cultural truth that I think is like one of those things that you shouldn't miss. And if you're someone that like thinks you like want to build up a grander understanding of what Silicon Valley is doing in its presence in culture, or you just simply like reading about shitty people doing shitty things, this is the book for you. I think it is so fun. And regardless of like, I think your background knowledge in these things, if you are just like seeing this video, if you've spent any time on social media, this is the book for you. I think this one is a grand fun time, and I think you will absolutely devour it. At number 9 on the list, There Is No Place for Us: Working and Homeless in America by Brian Goldstone. This book is so well done. It's a pretty dense and long read, but I think it's a book that just like the topic is something that a lot of us are considering or thinking about, talking about homelessness in the United States, how it is operating, and the nuances that I think culture basically never captures. This book really focuses on people that are working full time and also still homeless. So it provides this unique experience at looking at homelessness through a nuance that culture basically never captures. And there are so many conversations to have about this. I would actually really encourage you to just like look up podcasts that Brian has been on, because I think he has so much more to say than even 500 pages can cover. But something that I think will be like the sticking point and the point to draw you in and make you feel like you must read this is basically this statistic that he plays with this entire book of the idea that homelessness, as we conceptualize it, is wrong. That homelessness by the numbers is actually 6 times larger than is being reported, because there are so many more caveats to how we conceptualize homelessness than like just people living on the streets, that never actually paints a true picture of what homelessness is. And so getting the kind of real understanding of homelessness through this book was just like one of the most eye-opening reading experiences that I've ever had. So I think this book is one everyone should read. Pick it up with your book club, pick it up with friends, and just like let your mind kind of reconsider and reevaluate how we think about homelessness, because I think it is an entire world and existence that so many of us do not have a firm understanding of, while also being almost all of us really close to it. And so this is a book that I think is just one of those things that will be the fundamental or the foundation for how to understand the modern world. And number 8 on the list, we have Is a River Alive by Robert Macfarlane. And Robert Macfarlane is an author, especially in nature writing, that I've heard so much about. And now that I have finally read his work, I am adamant that next year I'm going to read everything he's written. He is just such a beautiful, poetic, just like a hauntingly personal and deep understanding of how to write these stories that I think just like as a work of art is like in a world of its own within like how to really tell a nonfiction story. But also within this book in particular, he's telling the story of 3 different rivers in Ecuador, India, and Canada, and like kind of his like personal reporting while living amongst these communities living on the river, how their governments have conceptualized water sources, and how we should think and view about rivers through a historical, through a critical literature approach, but also through like just a deeply infectious philosophy of how we should consider the world. I think this book has kind of a whole rapturous way of talking about river, of talking about land, of talking about our place in the world, that it is one of those things that I'm going to be honest, he can be a little pretentious in how he like just structures sentences, that I think is one of those books that you will probably need a little momentum to get you into it. Like it just it takes some time to adapt to his writing style, that like I think once you get going, you will then feel fully engulfed and you will just be drowning in the beauty and complexity of these stories. But it might just take 20 pages. So take your time with this. I think it's one that requires it a little bit, but it's also one that absolutely deserves it, because I think this is one of those things. It's telling a story that I think we need to consider for our future, consider for our present, but also telling the story through a way that I think will capture the deeply emotional side with how we think and view our beautiful, complex world. At number 7 on the list is Search's Selfhood in the Digital Age by Vahani Vara. This is a book that has probably done more to complicate my views and feelings about AI and our time on the internet. This book really does a fascinating job at painting a really unbelievably personal perspective on what it is we are doing online, how we are spending our time, what it says about us, what it can say about us, but then also just like I think there's this underlying empathy through which she explores these topics, gets into kind of some of her difficult times on the internet, the difficult things in her life that has led her to being a high media consumer. It's a book that I think is so strange. And even describing it doesn't feel like I'm really painting a full picture of it because ultimately it's a look at just like us and the internet as a sense of relationship, as a sense of identity. And I think this is a thing that a lot of us think about a lot, but maybe we don't think about it like super consciously. Like it's an underlying part of all of our lives. And yet I think we're just like failing to fully recognize that side of ourselves. Like, who are we as a person in a infinitely connected world? And Vahani goes into trying to explore that topic, and I just found myself so drawn into these stories. It's both beautiful and haunting because it's a lot of her writings on grief of losing her sister, but also through that we have this twisting and turning of basically who are we? And I think this is just like one of those things that once I started into this book, I couldn't put it down. It's something that I think about constantly, and also I think it does provide some really complex questions about how we should conceptualize who we are, how we're spending our time, what exactly is AI doing to us, and how should we really fully consider it? Because I think so much of culture tells you exactly how you should think and feel. And I think this book just provides so many opportunities for us to just ask those questions more deeply of ourselves. And I could not get enough of this book. It's probably one that I'm going to reread several times over the next few years because just as culture becomes more transformed and captured by technology, this is a book that I think should be on everyone's reading list. At number 6 on the list is When It All Burns Fighting Fire in a Transformed World by Jordan Thomas. This is a phenomenal look at being a hotshot firefighter that is both like some of the best personal writing I have ever found within a story about nature, but also at the same time gives you such a great scientific and broad understanding of what fire is doing in our changing world. And if you live anywhere near a fire region, I think this is one of those books that you should definitely read. I think it both like captures the portrait of like how our planet is burning, but also does it through the most like resonant personal approach to telling this story that I think both this academic look and personal look are both things that are sometimes they feel like their own separate stories, and his ability to pull these things in together make this a must read experience. I loved this book. I cannot give enough praise to it. If you're devouring anything on climate change, add this high on the list because I think not only is it a great education, but I also think it's like a fundamentally beautiful book. It's a finalist for the National Book Award and fully deserved. It's one of the best books to come out this year, and I think not enough people have read it. And everyone that I have seen that has read it has really loved it because I just think it's just so well done. There's nothing bad I can say about it because it just does everything it sets out to do so completely and so thoroughly that I think just like when you get to the end of this book, you will just feel like, wow, he really painted such a vivid portrait of this topic. And I think you'll just feel so much more sure of how to conceptualize the strange devastating world that we're living. At number 5 on the list is a book that I read 3 times this year. That is The Serviceberry: Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is an incredibly short book. I think the audiobook is like 2 hours. You play it at 2x speed, you can finish it by the time you're done with a nice walk. This is the book that I think everyone should read because it is just one of those things that it is so beautiful, but also is so easy to digest. The way that Robin Wall Kimmerer approaches telling the story of nature through a deeply personal lens and through like how we should view the world around us, but also in doing that, how we should view the people around us is the way that I think must happen in order for us to fight climate change. In order for us to build a more beautiful world, this book has to come true. And it is coming true in so many unique and beautiful ways that she talks about that I think deeply caring about the world around us is just something that so many of us feel compelled to consider, to think about, to practice, that this is just like one of the most endearing reading experiences that you will ever have. So, this one is incredibly short. The book is genuinely just like beautiful. It's poetic, it's emotional, it's so comforting, and it's just one of those books that I don't know why someone wouldn't pick this up. You know, I think that of all of her work, she has some of the best ability to tell really kind of complex stories about botany and history and our changing world, but she does it through this like such a compelling narrative and voice and like something that just draws you in. So whether you're doing the audiobook of her work, which they're all phenomenal, or whether you're doing the physical reading, like this is a book that's just inescapable. I will read you the little thing on the back of this book because I just think it is, this is how we should view everything around us. And it just says, all flourishing is mutual. And really, this is book that is just about positive and beauty of like what communism can be for our natural world. And I think it is so infectious. And it's something that I'm probably going to, do the audiobook of this like every 6 months just because I want to sit with this book as many times as possible. At number 4 is Poet Square, A Memoir in 30 Cats by Courtney Gustafson. I love this book. Every moment that I spent with this book was just so delightful. Courtney's ability to tell a story about caring for cats is like both like fascinating and beautiful and quiet, but also underlying this entire narrative of how she came to like care for a colony of feral cats is just like this deeply beautiful and infectious view of how we should care for our environment, how we should care for each other, how we should care for nature and animals. And I just think, like, of all the books that I read this year, I just want to hang out with Courtney. Like, reading her work and getting to spend time in the way that her mind conceptualizes and tells and crafts a story was such a beautiful experience that is just like makes me kind of just fall in love with her as a person because I think there is so much beauty and nuance in how she captures a story that it's just she's just the type of person that I would listen to talk all day long and be so thankful and feel so rewarded that I got to spend time kind of just like watching her mind view the world around us. So it's a fun story. It's a kind of deeply sad story in moments, but it's also just like a story that captures the beautiful nuance with how we think about pets in our lives. And as someone that has now, I have 3 cats, and it has become like a part of my life that I love so much. Here's my 3 cats actually. It's just something that I can't escape thinking about it. And so getting a perfect perspective on like how we should view cats and our culture was just the most delightful reading experience that I had all year. I love this book. I think it's regardless of whether you are a cat person or whether you like think about the care that goes into animal care within our communities. I think it's a book that like really resonates with how we are caring for and providing for our local communities. So like regardless of whether this feels deeply personal or whether you just like want to kind of give a little bit more nuance to how we are envisioning and considering our communities, this is a book that I think captures all of that landscape so beautifully. So I love this book. I think this is one that you should read because I think it's so fascinating and so beautiful and so comforting all at the same time. At number 3, we have the most difficult read of this entire year for me. That was Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal by Muhammad Al-Kurd. This book is a very personal, deep look at Muhammad Al-Kurd's kind of analysis or the process of living through the Palestinian genocide over the last couple of years. This book is a look at how he has viewed this as a point in a deeply long history, but also just like how this has impacted his conversations, how this has impacted his livelihood, how this has been just a part of life that is always being felt and experienced in the most intimate ways possible. And so, learning about the genocide through a Palestinian voice and learning about the deep nuances with how we should consider victimhood, how we should consider people, and how the American media landscape has bastardized our concept of history, of morality, of what stories are being told. I think this book captures all of it. And at the same time, the approach and the storytelling within this is just something that, like, while I was reading this book, I was stopping like every 10 pages for like a full day because I would read it and I'd just be so consumed with his ability to craft the story and this ability to like get inside of your head as a reader, that it was just like overwhelming, but yet I did not want to stop thinking about it. And so this is one of the most phenomenal reading experiences that you can ever have. But more than that, more than just like reading a book that is so incredibly well done, it's also just one of the most important books for this modern moment. How we conceptualize victims is something that I think extends far beyond the genocide in Gaza. And I think it's just something that becomes one of those things that will be a foundation for how you think and view the world around you. So, Perfect Victims is a book that you can't miss. I think it's one that everyone should read, and I think it's just one that will probably require a little bit more time and care for yourself while reading, but it's a book that you absolutely must read. Out of my entire top 20, I feel the most conflicted about having this on my list, but this is number 2, A Physical Education: How He Escaped Diet Culture and Gained the Power of Lifting by Casey Johnston. I resonate with this book so much. I have been in this process, in this journey of getting myself into shape over the last year. I've started lifting weights more regularly. I've started running. I've started entering races. My plan is to run a full marathon next year. And so having Casey's way of approaching fitness kind of just on my mind for the last 6 months has been such a freeing and rewarding experience that this book might not be for you. I'm not going to call this one an essential book because, this just might not be the most helpful way or approach for where you're at in life. But for me, as someone that has like always wanted more out of my body, always wanted to achieve more, like lifting more weights, running faster, running further, I think about this all the time. It's just who I am as a person. And this was the book that I needed more than anything. And I don't know. I know this probably isn't convincing you to read this or pick it up, but maybe that's okay. Maybe some books just speak deeply to us in the moment that we consume them, and this is the book that did that for me. I have thought about this every day for 6 months. It's a book that I'm going to reread constantly. The audiobook is incredible. The storytelling is so well done, and it is both a portrait of the fitness community, it's a look at the science, and it's also a look at kind of her personal journey with becoming a powerlifter, and how gender and how our bodies and how our society is built on this idea of perfection, and how chasing after that is insane. Like, just truly, like, that is not what we should actively pursue. And I think having a kind of leftist perspective on fitness through a personal narrative, and then also some of the most efficient fitness and science writing, is just the way that I want to capture this story. It's the way that I want to think about the story. So if you're just someone that is looking to make, changes, New Year's resolutions, you're trying to get yourself more in shape or spend more time considering and thinking about or participating in fitness, I think you really should check this out. But it's just one of those things that this book isn't for everyone. That's okay. But for me, this was inescapable. I love this book. I'm obsessed with this book, and it really will become kind of the most foundational book with how I think about and conceptualize what I'm doing to my body on a daily basis. So I absolutely love this book. I don't know if you will, but for me, I just can't stop thinking about this one. And because I have obsessively thought about this book for 6 months, it's number two on the list. I have never finished a book and then immediately restarted it. And that is why number one on my list is One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El Akkad. This book is a look at his perspective on the Gaza genocide and as a Egyptian immigrant to Canada and the United States and as a journalist, as someone that has been writing about this topic, it's how he really understands the American media empire and how it has twisted and morphed and bastardized the subject in which has been all over our social media feeds. It is the thing that I think, as much as of anything, has kind of given us a perspective on what exactly the reality is that we are living through. And Omar Al Khan does a phenomenal job at just painting the full realities through which we're living in. And I think that's just how I would try to approach convincing someone to read this book, is that we have all been living through this fracturing reality for the last 2 years. We have all understood just how many lies and quasi realities are being built out of the media, and that like we understand now so intimately just like the insanity through which we're living through. And his perspective, his analysis, his ability to actually like sift through and wind his way through into a really true understanding of what is happening and how we could conceptualize it and how we should demonize the complex topics and essence of what the American empire is it's just like one of those things that he's doing it so brilliantly, but also he's doing it with some of the most beautiful and resonant sentences that you'll ever read. So just as a piece of literature, it's phenomenal. But as a piece of understanding our culture, our history, our participation in the system, it's a must read. This book is essential, and I think it's one of those things that I bet you will probably feel much like I did, that you will consume this book as fast as possible because you will be totally enraptured in the story, and then you will not want to escape that, and you'll just pick it right back up. And I think that's just a unbelievable ability to tell a story, is to get the reader so supplanted within your writing, within your storytelling, within how your mind understands this very deeply hidden part of our culture that it's just like it's inescapable, and I you won't want to escape it. And I think that's why this book is going to be on basically every top of the year list, because it's one of those books that is inescapable for all of those who have read it. And so I really hope you'll pick it up if you haven't already. I think this book is phenomenal, it's essential, and it's also just so unbelievably timely.